Welcome, sports fans, boys and girls of all ages, to episode number 4, marking 1 month for our podcast Garbage Time Takes. My name is Derek. Today with me are my co-hosts, Dennis. And Bobby. Guys, it's been 1 month. What are you guys' thoughts on the podcast so far?
No, I'm just so glad that we decided to fully send it. Take that step from normal conversation and bring it to the podcast world. Even if we are not one of the top podcasts in the world or what have you, it still gives us something to look forward to every week. And I've had a ton of fun doing this, and I look forward to more great debates.
Yeah, I second that opinion. I mean, this has just been so enjoyable for me to sit down with you guys and just hash things out. I think a lot of times we have similar opinions, but also it's just interesting when we have disagreements to kind of air those out, and I think we all represent kind of a diverse range of sports teams and fandoms, so it's been a blast for me.
Yeah, I can definitely say the same thing. Really had a ton of fun with you guys, and I look forward to many more episodes to come. But of course, we couldn't do it without you guys, the viewers, so thank you. We have a couple 5-star ratings on iTunes. Keep leaving those on there. Leave us some reviews so we can read those off in future podcasts. Continue to support us, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean. Comment, follow us, subscribe, all those places. We'd really appreciate it. We are looking into creating Instagram and Twitter accounts, so we will definitely mention that in whatever podcast next when we decide to sort of get that all finalized. But moving on into topic numero uno, let's start with a little bit of national basketball news. Carmelo Anthony has made his way back into the NBA.
Oh, brother.
To the Portland Trailblazers. It was a desperate man finding a desperate team, and it so happened to work out. Bobby, what are your thoughts on Carmelo Anthony back in the league?
Well, here's my thoughts. Carmelo Anthony was a player that, growing up, I really admired. I mean, the man had a absolute killer mid-range game. He was an ISO scorer. I mean, really the epitome of, passing the ball, clear out, and go to work.
One of the original ball-dominant players.
Exactly. And it was kind of a shame to see him get, ousted from the league in the way that he did, just because, he kind of saw himself in one light and what he could do, what his skills represented. And, I'm Carmelo Anthony. I can do this.
There's sort of been a disparity between Carmelo's envisioned role and the team's envisioned role for him. Some miscommunication there.
And, and it was really great to see him get another opportunity as far as, playing with another team in the league. And as you said, very desperate Portland Trailblazers who have had a absolute slew of injuries.
I mean, Carmelo's in the starting lineup, for goodness sake.
Yeah, he is. We all kind of talked about, or at least pundits had talked about, that when Carmelo was going to return to the league, it would be, if he would, it would have to be in a reserve role, a reserve capacity, a bench role. Coming off the bench, he was just going to have to accept that was the only way he could really find any time, maybe some offensive production in the second unit kind of thing. So it's just kind of ironic to see Carmelo return, and then the first thing that happens is the man's automatically inserted into the starting lineup, and same old Carmelo at this point comes back in, starts bricking shots left and right.
He is 5 of 8 from 3, though.
5 of 8 from 3. You love to see that, but efficiency is not always the best. Defense is still absolutely atrocious.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I think all teams kind of knew that when they were getting into the Carmelo Anthony game.
Yeah,
and Portland definitely knew that, but
just kind of hoping his offensive acumen would outweigh his defensive liabilities.
Exactly. And, against Milwaukee the other night, yesterday, I believe it was, he had an 18.7 board performance, which, I mean, that's production.
Yep.
I mean, it's production. It was a losing effort, but they were playing the Bucks.
Yeah.
But, as I said, it's a necessity that the Portland Trailblazers have somebody in at forward, and on the market, he's probably the best free agent that was available at the time. Definitely the most, acumened, like as far as the amount of awards and things that he's earned. But we'll see how long this lasts before he's back in the reserve role. I'm thinking upon the return of some of their other forwards that they're going to oust him, but we'll see if he can carve out a little niche. They didn't give him any guaranteed money in his contract, so they can cut bait really any time. But I wish the best for him, and I'm glad that even if this is his last season and he won't get another opportunity after this year, he had a little bit of a going out party, so to speak, instead of just kind of being ousted from the league.
Yeah, I think it was nice just to see Carmelo back in the league, regardless of whether or not I think he's a good player. Just seeing him back in the league brings back some nostalgia from when he was with Denver when he's with New York. Seeing old Carmelo again, trying to ISO up, waving off C.J. McCollum.
Waving off anybody.
Yeah, basically. All those things that made Carmelo such a fun player to watch. This wasn't something I was going to bring up, but it just occurred to me. If Carmelo can get back in the league, I think Jamal Crawford should get back in the league.
Oh, my God. I'm so glad you brought that up, Derek. I'm so glad.
He's a Michigan man. He's got some of the best handles of all time. And if Carmelo can get in the league, I'm sure there's got to be a team out there that could use some depth three-point shooting off the bench.
And I'm very glad you brought that up, Derek, because I had heard about that very scenario too, and I was thinking that Jamal Crawford has been playing nonstop. Right. He's never been out of the league.
Yeah.
He's still got great handles, can shoot very well, a great team player, great veteran presence.
Exactly.
I mean, hell, Vince Carter's on the roster.
Exactly.
And I don't even think he can do.
Dude can't hardly walk.
A quarter of the stuff that Jamal Crawford could still do at this point in his career.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised to see a team that's making a push sign him around the deadline. I think that the Lakers should be interested. The Clippers should be interested. I mean, he did play for the Clippers, if I'm not mistaken, for a very long time. So I wouldn't be surprised if they bring him back in. Just an up-and-coming team. Maybe even Houston considers bringing him back in with the Mike D'Antoni three-point run-and-gun offense that they run.
For sure.
Maybe they consider bringing him in. Trying to make a push to the playoffs, but definitely need to see Jamal Crawford back in the league, and he's such a fun player to watch. Talk about nostalgia. Definitely plenty of highlights if you go search up Jamal Crawford highlights.
Man's a certified ankle snatcher.
Ankle snatcher and three-point sharpshooter.
For sure.
So yeah, he definitely needs another opportunity.
I agree. All right. Moving on, Dennis, I know basketball isn't your strong suit, so that's why we felt we just would keep that one a little bit short.
But no worries. That actually was interesting. Those are some nostalgic names for me as well. Playing NBA, 2K basketball.
NBA Live, baby. NBA Live 2K.
07, 08, 09 in there when I was growing up. Still not a huge NBA fan, but I did play a lot of the video games, and those are guys that I played with all the way back then. And so to hear them coming up in the news now is interesting, that's for sure.
For sure. All right, moving on into college football. Let's just give a brief recap real quick of the Michigan State game for those who care like I do.
Yeah, we'll have to keep it brief.
Yeah,
between these two guys.
Yeah, we'll try and keep it brief, but the good guys won. They blew them out in
poor Bobby.
In expected fashion. It was close for maybe the first 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I think you got to give them a little bit more than that. Probably the first quarter. They kind of kept it within a touchdown, right?
Yeah, sure, whatever. Regardless.
We were watching it.
It was like 14-7 after the first quarter.
MSU scored first,
they did.
yada, 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 whoop-de-doo. I was not even concerned for a second, but anyway, moving on from all that bull jive. Michigan did win 44 to what? What'd you guys even have?
Was it 10?
I think it was 10. It was a rather minuscule amount. Mark D'Antonio did announce recently that he does fully plan on coming back next year, much to my own surprise. But then again, Mark D'Antonio is a guy that never really quits, except last Saturday when everything was falling apart and we absolutely manhandled MSU from start to end, really.
The shots were still flying.
It was really great to see us, pull out one less bag of tricks on the RPO, get Cornelius Johnson his first tub of the year wide open to really run up the score. That one felt really good for me. Bobby, what you got? Any closing thoughts on the Michigan State game?
Where were the trick plays that I was calling for?
You were
calling for them.
You were imploring for Brad Salem to pull out all the sleeves.
Brad Salem needs to be ran out of town immediately.
Yeah.
I was so, and you see, I never understand why we can just make it look so easy at times, and then at other times we can just make it look so very difficult.
Didn't help that you guys had Butterfingers McGee's all over the place
I
at
mean,
wide receiver.
We were about at 7th string. We were pulling people out of the Ann Arbor stands to come play for us.
Lewerke was all over the place.
Lewerke was trying to make it work, but unfortunately things were not working for him.
That's right. He stole that from me, jerk.
I wish I could say that was true. However, Brad Salem needs to be ran out of town, fired, and his name scratched from the books immediately. The man does not know the definition of a trick play, and
even Michigan tried running a trick play, albeit it was poorly executed.
If I don't see any trick plays against Rutgers in Maryland, I may just have a thrombosis and an aneurysm.
Where were the fake punts, Bob?
There was no fake punts. There were no fake punts.
Every single fourth down, I was at home this weekend, so I was not unfortunately able to watch the game with Bobby and Dennis. But I can assure you when I say that every single fourth down, I said, "Watch out for the fake punt," because I was not going to be fooled.
I'm utterly disgusted. I just like to point out for our fans that I invited Des to come to an MSU football game, the last game of the season against Maryland, and he declined me, saying that they were so terrible he would not even grace the presence. He would not even grace his presence in Spartan Stadium.
Man.
It was a horribly tough scene. But all I have to say is that I'm looking forward to not being able to talk about football season anymore for the Michigan State Spartans. I'm hoping we end up being bowl eligible.
That was one last thing I was going to bring up before we moved on. Do you think MSU wins the last two games to get bowl eligibility?
I think in an absolute barn burner, both games.
You think so?
We come out bowl eligible.
I have a feeling Rutgers will be the team that trips you up if they do. They're very sneaky and tend to pull out the stops against MSU.
Every year, without fail.
I know last year it was very, very close.
It's without fail. Every year they do this. And Brad Salem's got to have a counterpunch, but I don't even think the guy knows who boxing gloves are in a figurative sense here, because the man never even calls anything but run up the gut and a couple of passes, but we can't throw it to anybody because there's nobody good on the outside, and we don't know any trick plays, no double passes. There were no flea flicker, not even a flea flicker. I mean, we didn't even
not even a reverse,
not even a simple reverse. Nothing.
That loss to Illinois might really come and bite you.
Yeah, really. You never know.
You really need the last two now.
Yeah, definitely disappointing for MSU to come out of that one. Not disappointing in the least for Michigan. We've now taken 3 out of the last 4, and it definitely feels like momentum of the series, at least from a Michigan standpoint, has swung in our favor. That will be yet to see, though, going into future games next year, when what could be Mark Antonio's final year next year, but I guess we'll never know. The guy will just decide to retire when he decides to retire. Might as well just die as coach of the MSU Spartans. Live out his legacy.
Come on.
All right. Keeping in tune with Michigan teams, the Central Michigan Chippewas are we're so very proud of them this week.
We're making a bowl, baby.
We are. We were bowl eligible before last week, and they decided, you know what, we don't want to just be bowl eligible. We want to contend for the MAC West title. And gosh darn it, we're still in it after a huge comeback win versus, Ball State?
Ball State.
Ball State, 45-44 at Ball State. They made a stop defensively when they needed it. With about 3 to 5 minutes left, I don't remember for sure. Offense came down the field, scored a tub, and then the defense, closed out the game at the end. Guys, fire up Chips, baby. How about it?
Dennis, what do you got to say about this?
I'm just astounded. The coaching of Jim McElwain this year has just been. I was a little skeptical as well.
You had to be. With a 1-11 season, what can one head coach really do with a 1-11 team? But
all I got to say is he better be the coach of the MAC. It's just the coach of the year in the MAC. Coach of the year in the MAC. It's been absolutely incredible. What a turnaround. The roster itself hasn't really changed a whole lot.
Not particularly.
Obviously, this was his first recruiting class, technically, but a lot of those guys are not the guys that are playing. That's right. A lot of guys that we see that played on this team last year, and so the turnaround is just
the John Bonavago era.
The John Bonavago era, yeah, exactly. Jonathan Ward, Kobe Lewis has played well as a running back, and then
Khalil Pimpleton, baby.
Khalil Pimpleton as well has really stepped up, and obviously the defense was not the problem last year either, and they've continued that trend of being quite solid
Except
this year as well.
They did allow 44 points.
They did crack a little bit, but they held when it mattered.
Yes, they did.
Which is the huge thing. So I'm so excited. I hope that they get an interesting bowl game.
Yeah.
How about a MAC championship?
I
That could
agree.
be.
Ford
Could
Field,
be.
baby. Bring us to Ford Field. Let us
Let's
go
see
down
a
to the
win.
MAC
Let us see
championship.
a winner at Ford Field for once.
Well, we need a victory versus Toledo, and we need a Western Michigan loss to none other than Northern Illinois.
It's just happened. It's so ironic that the team that's about ready to best us for the MAC West title is none other than our arch rival Western
Yes,
Michigan.
of course.
Buck the Broncos,
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that.
to put it so eloquently.
But yes, very proud of our CMU Chippewas for going out there, keeping the MAC West alive. Now it's 7-4 on the season compared to 1-11 last season.
Oh, thank God.
Hopefully, Coach McElwain doesn't leave us after this season. You never know if this type of job for him is just a stepping stone type of job, or if he'll get poached by a larger university looking for a head coaching switch. But yeah, big congrats to Coach McElwain and the CMU Chippewa football team for their efforts last week. In continuation with college football, the Minnesota Golden Gophers, as me and Bobby predicted last week, have been exposed as a fraud by the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, granted, it is very difficult to go into Kinnick in Iowa and get a win at a night game. Or was it a night game? Was it a day game?
I thought it was an afternoon game.
Was it
It
an
was a
afternoon?
3:30 game.
It was an afternoon
Yep,
game.
that's right.
Regardless, Kinnick Stadium, it's very difficult, and Iowa tends to be, perfect season killers, and they did it again this year, unsurprisingly to me anyway, because as me and Bobby discussed last week, Minnesota's a fraud.
Yep,
Penn State was also a fraud, and, when push came to shove, Minnesota couldn't get it done, and now their, college football playoff hopes are down the drain, as they should be. Of course, they still have the Big Ten West to play for, which would leave
Big Ten
them
championship.
in the Big Ten championship. So that is still a possibility. But frankly, it doesn't matter who from the Big Ten West goes to the Big Ten championship game. The East is going to win it, and so Minnesota basically is just, kept their fans from having to, deal with the inevitable later on down the road, and that's that they're a fraud. Dennis, you tried to defend Minnesota last week.
I did defend Minnesota last week. That's right.
What were your thoughts, coming out of that loss to Iowa?
Well, Derek, I was watching the end of that game against Iowa
I think
this
we were
weekend.
watching that.
We were both watching. Yeah, me and Bobby were watching that game together, and I was just heartbroken at the result of that game. I was really pulling for the Golden Gophers, believing that maybe there's really something there, and I think they did play quite well. I do think that this result does not say anything about their chances to win games the rest of the year. I do agree that their college football playoff hopes are down the drain, sadly, to my dismay.
But they definitely still have plenty to
But they have lots to play for, absolutely.
Yep,
I mean, they
of
finish
course.
up with, they play Wisconsin, right?
Yep.
And then they got another game on the end of the schedule here.
I believe
They play Northwestern this week.
Yes.
Yeah, they play Northwestern and then Wisconsin, and then obviously Big Ten championship game, hopefully for them. That's what they're going for. So I'll be interested to see what they're able to do. I would have to agree with Derek that they're probably not going to win the championship game should they get there.
Not even close.
And it's not really going to be much of a contest. But I do applaud the Golden Gophers for what they've been able to do this year, and I don't think that last week's result takes anything away from the season they've had.
Bobby, your thoughts on Minnesota?
Minnesota's an absolute fraud.
Oh, man.
They,
Right at it.
It was a competitive game.
It was.
It was very
to be fair, it was a very good game to watch, but it looked like what I'd expect out of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Competitive, but not winning. And we've kind of seen the opposite of that. Most of the games that have been, struggles for Minnesota against kind of the middle to bottom teams in the Big Ten in the past have been resounding victories for them, which is a great sign as an up and coming program. But I don't think their talent is there yet to compete with the top of the top. And I think Iowa, to their credit, pulled out a close game. That in a team that has not been perfect in many respects this season as Iowa. but I'll still be interested to see what they do against Wisconsin. And then even against Ohio State, that they'll probably see in the Big Ten championship game. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how they stack up against those teams, just because I believe in those teams a little bit more than I believe in Penn State and Iowa even.
Yeah, I would also, I wouldn't be surprised to see Minnesota end up losing in the to Wisconsin, and then Wisconsin holds the tiebreaker over them, because I believe Wisconsin only has 2 conference losses. That would drop Minnesota to 2 conference losses, and Wisconsin, by way of tiebreaker with head-to-head victories, because they also beat Iowa, would move into the Big Ten championship. Speaking of college football playoff implications, Ohio State, Penn State this week.
Massive game. Game.
It is a massive game. But if I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm not concerned in the slightest. If Penn State can get beat by a fraud team such as Minnesota, I don't foresee Ohio State really having any trouble with Penn State this week. They're getting Chase Young back, which, as if Ohio State needed any more help, they're getting back arguably a top 3 player in college football this week. So I expect to see more of the same from Ohio State this week versus Penn State, taking home probably a 2-possession win, if not more than that.
Well, that'll certainly be interesting to watch out for. I've always been kind of a believer in the Nittany Lions. I don't know why that bias has come to me necessarily. I did look at going there at one short time, but I'm going to fire up chips instead. So it's a much better choice, I would say, coming here to Central Michigan. Don't regret it in the slightest, but I've always kind of liked Penn State football. Maybe at least a part of that is just because I have a lot of friends that are Ohio State fans back home, being only less than 2 hours away from Columbus, and they bother the living crap out of me, to put it quite frankly. They're just quite obnoxious Ohio State fans, and so I would be interested to see if Penn State can pull out the upset in this game. Chase Young is obviously going to be a huge factor, and Ohio State has really not shown any sign of weakness yet this year.
Agreed.
And if Penn State is actually able to win that game, what's it going to mean for Ohio State, Michigan? That's the question, because then that game is not necessarily quite as significant as usual.
Right. Well, I don't know if I would say that. I think Michigan versus Ohio State always.
Of course, it's always significant.
It's always significant.
Of course,
it might not be as significant for Ohio State per se. If a loss to Penn State could derail their college football playoff chances, but really any loss here on out for them can. But I spoke a little bit. Bobby, you got anything to say on Ohio State versus Penn State?
I expect a big win for Ohio State, but that's about all I can say, given the fact that I don't believe in Penn State much at all either.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're always overrated most years.
I agree.
And if they can get knocked off by Minnesota, as I previously said, was a fraud, like you mentioned, I don't really have much faith in Penn State. I just think they'll just be outmatched at basically every position. I hope it stays close for the viewer's sake, but
right, college game day, baby.
But I think it won't be close. I think it'll be. I think Michigan and Ohio State will
be a more competitive.
It will be the game that
it always is.
You're gonna want to keep your eyes on. I don't think Ohio State will have lost going into that game. Michigan's obviously going to want to put one in the storybooks, and Jim Harbaugh's got a lot to prove as well. He's currently come up empty against the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Still hasn't beaten the Buckeyes.
No, we have not.
And that would be the, that would be the ultimate way to say, after being questioned many times before about, can he win in the big moment? That would be the ultimate, nail in that, argument. But let's not jump the gun. I guess it's not there yet.
That'll be the next week.
We got to go next week.
But
that's for sure.
That's kind of what's on my mind in that department.
Yeah. All right. One last thing about college football before we move on to the NFL.
Let's not gloss over this point.
That's right. Tua Tagovailoa suffered a really catastrophic injury, dislocated his hip.
Yeah.
Posterior wall fracture, if I remember correctly.
Terrible. Yeah.
I was of the, position that Tua really shouldn't have even been in the game at that point.
No.
I mean, I could have argued that he shouldn't have played to begin with. Especially, he's been bothered by that ankle. Ankles are really, tricky to deal with. And I really didn't see why there was a reason for Tua playing in that game. And
Especially at that given point.
Exactly. And
there's no way they're going to lose to Mississippi State.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Right. And, you can say, oh, but what if he didn't get hurt? Would it have mattered? And, you can go back and forth with hypotheticals. But the fact of the matter is now he's hurt. Now he's done for the rest of the year. Alabama's going to have to ride with Mac Jones. I really don't see Alabama getting into the college football playoff at this point with Tua being out, just based on the sole fact that Alabama did not hardly put up any points once Tua left the game. Nick Saban, obviously, and Tua, you feel bad for the kid. I'm sure the last thing Nick Saban wanted to happen was for Tua to get hurt. But, the fact of the matter is that he did, and I think the responsibility's got to go on the head coach for leaving him in the game. You can say, we just wanted him to run a 2-minute drill, what have you. But, the story is he's done for the year. It'll be interesting to watch his draft stock.
Yep.
This does open the door, a possibility for Tua to come back to Alabama next year, depending on how he feels about his NFL status. But, I just thought it's a really tragic, unfortunate situation that I think could have been avoided entirely, because Alabama was not going to have trouble in that game. And now you've lost your starting quarterback for the year.
No, I truly hate to see it. I was a big Tua fan. Still I am a big Tua fan.
Yeah.
But I think as you were saying, they would conclude, I think that the big point is this really opens the door for another year of Alabama for Tua.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had to guess right now, he will come back for next season, just because, there's a lot of QBs in this draft class that are, making a big run as of late at their draft stock. Joe Burrow.
Justin Herbert at Oregon's been there all year.
Justin Herbert's always had a high draft stock. There's quite a few big opportunities for high draft picks for quarterbacks this year. Even the Oklahoma quarterback and the
Jalen
quarterback
Hurts
as well. But I don't think he's draft eligible yet. Is Justin Fields?
I
think he's a sophomore only.
Yeah, he might be a redshirt sophomore, so he
I
might
believe
not.
That's right.
Yeah, he might not be eligible quite yet.
So
but Jalen Hurts, I definitely think so.
Eligible,
yes.
yeah. So there's three right there that have the opportunity to go pretty decently high,
for sure.
and are healthy at this point.
Yeah.
So that's a big the best ability is availability, as I like to say. And he'll obviously be healthy by the next NFL season, I'm thinking. But you hate to see it, and I think that college football may be in for a treat next year, even if this man needs to come back and play another season, just because he does bring a lot of talent to the table, and it's always fun watching a big game with the best of the best on each side.
Yeah, that was definitely something I wanted to bring up. Obviously, this is going to affect Alabama throughout the rest of the season. I think they're sitting at 5 right now in the college football playoff rankings, a couple of games to finish out the year. Obviously, at this point without Tua, but really the big deal here is not necessarily the rest of Alabama's season, but it's Tua's draft value and what he's going to see that as. Really was the front runner, I would say, along with Joe Burrow coming into this season in terms of top quarterback that was going to be eligible for draft. And
Justin Herbert being in the discussion.
And Justin Herbert, of course, is also in the discussion. But now with this injury, that is sadly going to be a huge factor, and not necessarily Tua's fault by any stretch of the imagination. But it's still going to be a huge factor as NFL teams look to evaluate how much of an asset he will be to their team and their organization. So I do think I would agree with Bobby that there's quite a big possibility that he'll come back and play for Alabama again next year, and we'll have to see how that all plays out.
I think just looking at the NFL landscape right now for quarterback need, this year
the Bengals
are in need.
Yeah, that's what
potentially. I thought Ryan Finley was the Lord and Savior, but I'll pass over that point.
We'll wait to talk about that in a little bit.
But I really think it's a big deal that there's teams that are looking right now, but I think that a lot of teams right now are kind of riding with what they have maybe for another year, and I think there'll be opportunities still for. Teams are always looking for quarterback talent, but I think not this coming draft, but I think the year after will be even potentially even bigger for quarterbacks than what they are right now. Just because I think there's some teams that are still kind of evaluating what they've got
at the quarterback
position. Now, some of those teams are obviously going to, if they're convinced, they're obviously going to take those talented guys now. But I don't think the market for Tua will be completely eviscerated after this draft, seeming as there's quite a big quarterback class coming in.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing that I was going to close off with was, this season, a lot of the national media headlines were tank for Tua.
Yep. Tank for Tua. That was a common phrase.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted, to get Dennis's point one last time. I feel like the Bengals were probably in that, tank for Tua discussion. Maybe,
there was
maybe
certainly
not.
some conversation around that.
And the Dolphins, I'm sure, were probably looking at a tank for Tua possibility. The Jets, although they're garbage, they probably still think they might have something in Sam Darnold, so they might not have been interested in
That's
Tua.
one of the teams I think might be a...
sort of wait one more year.
One more year, yeah.
I think there's a lot of guys a lot of teams that have kind of paid quarterbacks right now.
Mm-hmm.
That it's kind of coming to the point where, okay, like, we're not seeing much production out of you.
Right.
Do we need to look at that next option where we have you that's decent, but we can bring somebody up in the midst?
But yeah, definitely, the whole tank for Tua storyline that sort of shadowed the NFL season this year sort of, is seemingly,
gone.
It's up in the balance right now.
Tank for Burrow.
Yeah, maybe.
Doesn't have quite the same ring to it.
I personally like Joe Burrow as a quarterback better than I do Tua. Burrow just seems more like a complete passer to me personally.
I agree.
So all this tank for Tua talk, I was like, if I was an NFL executive, I think I would take Joe Burrow instead. But that's beside the point at this point, because it may not even matter because Tua may come back next year. Someone say Seg.
Seg.
Wait. All right. NFL, moving on. We'll start with the Bengals just because we had just brought them up. Dennis, the Bengals...
There's not a lot to talk about.
The Bengals fell to Oakland last week. Is that what it was?
That's right. Yeah, we lost to the Raiders.
John Gruden.
We lost to John Gruden's Gruden Grinders out there in Oakland, as I like to call them, the Gruden Grinders. They took us down. Ryan Finley put together a nice drive at the beginning of the game. Ended in a Joe Mixon rushing touchdown, his first of the year, which is just disgusting.
Oh my gosh.
Just absolutely disgusting. And then thereon after, we did absolutely nothing. Kicked a field goal for the rest of the game. That's exactly what the offense was able to muster together. So a disappointing
3 points in the second half and 7 in the first.
Yeah, it was the opening drive touchdown and then absolutely no offense to speak of whatsoever.
At least we finally all got a prediction right.
We all did get a prediction right. We all called a 14-point deficit.
Let me talk about, not to steal Dennis's thunder here, but let's just have a discussion about somebody who will not be on the right bench baller segment this week, Ryan Finley.
Oh, man.
One, because he's off the bench, and two, because he's not a baller. The man is completely in this game against the Oakland Raiders secondary,
which is among the worst in
the worst in the NFL, Swiss cheese galore, managed 13 for 31 for 115 yards in an interception with 0 tubs.
Yikes. Dennis, what do you have to say?
What do we have in what's your current talent evaluator brain telling you about Ryan Finley right now in the pocket?
There's a couple of things that I like to point out here so far. Number one, that it's only been 2 games. I think a couple weeks ago it was either the first or second podcast that we did. Shout out, we've been at it for a month already.
That's right.
While I'm at that, but it was one of those first couple of podcast episodes. I talked about how it's nice that we have 8 weeks now for evaluation of Ryan Finley's abilities before we have to decide what we're going to do moving forward at the quarterback position. But with that being said, these 2 games have been very unimpressive. And so I am curious to see what he's able to do. We get the Jets, we get the Dolphins, we get Cleveland twice to finish out the year. So I'm interested to see if he's able to kind of improve it all. But he's definitely set a low bar so far. And so improvement shouldn't be that difficult. Yeah. That's kind of how I look at it at this point.
I'm looking at this game right now, and I'm thinking to myself, if Andy Dalton plays, is that a win for the Bengals? I mean, they only lost by a tub. And if the man even passes for 50%, and he's improving over Ryan Finley.
Here's the thing. There's an argument that could be made. Of course, if Dalton plays, maybe we win the game. But at this point in the season, wins aren't really that important to the Cincinnati Bengals.
But you don't want to go down as 0-16.
Of course you don't want to go down as 0-16, but we got 6 more shots.
It's time to bring Andy Dalton out against Miami.
And definitely some winnable games ahead.
Definitely some winnable
games.
Absolutely. It's just, you've got to give the kid a couple more weeks. I think they really should stick with him through the end of the year just to see what he's able to do against some lower teams, maybe not quite as low as the Bengals. Still haven't won a game yet.
Bring back Andy Dalton.
I'll definitely be interested in joining that.
He doesn't deserve this.
The Red Rifle is in his place right now.
The Red Rifle needs to be on a different team.
He does need to be on a different team because the Bengals are not utilizing him.
Speaking of mediocre teams, the Detroit Lions.
Oh, what a segue.
I was at the game last Sunday.
I'm sorry.
I think I had mentioned that on the previous podcast that I'd be there in attendance. So I'm
first-hand thoughts.
I'm going to be able to give you guys the first-hand experience of what it was like to be at that game. I asked Bobby when I came back. I said, Bobby, could you hear the chants through the TV? And he said, loud and clear. And when I say that the Cowboys fans were loud at Ford Field, I would say that they probably had a 60-40 advantage in terms of Cowboys fans to Lions fan ratio.
That's disappointing.
At least that's how loud it felt. You start hearing the chants of defense while the Lions are on offense from Cowboys fans. That's how loud they are. And it was quite embarrassing to say the least. I would have thought that, as a player, as a coach, you say, guys, the away team's fans have overtaken your stadium, and as Lions fans, we did everything we could, to try and, balance it out, sort of push back against the Cowboys fans. But the fact of the matter was that the product on the field wasn't giving us anything, to cheer for.
Up.
Exactly. There was no way to energize the home crowd because, defensively, we talk about Swiss cheese defenses. Woo! The Lions' defense is bad. You can smell them from a mile away. They stink so much. So that was really disappointing. Listening to, Lions post-game radio shows on the way back, a lot of calls for the firing of Matt Patricia, some calls for the firings of Bob Quinn. We brought in Matt Patricia to be a defensive mastermind. 9-7 wasn't good enough. Bob Quinn's exact words. And Matt Patricia has 9 wins over a year and a half now to this point. Losing record. Bob Quinn also has a losing record. I know Bobby is big on, we don't have winning intangibles. The players aren't good enough. And I've been, of the mindset that
on the defense.
Yeah, especially on the defense. But just in general, your general take, I think, is that, if there's a problem, it's more often than not with the players. And I've been more on the side of it's the coaching. And, CMU, I think, was a pretty good example of, it was the coaching and not necessarily the players.
Absolutely.
But with the Lions, it's really hard to tell for me. Is it just because Matt Patricia has a niche defense that's so unique that he needs the perfect players in there? But the problem with that argument is I thought that was the whole point of this year's free agency and draft was to get players that fit the scheme. And so if it's the players that are
Second
not...
round pick on a linebacker, signing corners, signing defensive linemen.
Exactly. So if it's the players that are the problem, then that's on Bob Quinn and he needs to go.
Yep.
If it's the fact that the players aren't performing and developing well enough under Matt Patricia, he needs to go. There was a very good point that was made by Jeff Rieger. He was the Lions post-game show I was listening to. He said, presidents get 4 years, 4-year terms to do something. If you like the president and think he did a good enough job, you give him another 4 years. If not, you're gone and we bring in someone else. And he said, why can we not apply that to today's NFL? Bob Quinn has had 4 years to implement, a change in culture, regime, and make the Lions a winning program. And has he? No, he hasn't. He said this is his 4th year now. And Matt Patricia, he's only been here a year and a half. But the fact of the matter is,
he's Bob Quinn's guy.
And yes, he is Bob Quinn's guy. That's point 1. And point number 2 is we've taken a step back But not only have
we
we
weren't
taken
really that high to start,
right,
but we still haven't progressed.
You know, we were 9-7, and you implement a new defense. You say you take a step back, then start taking 2 steps forward. And I think that would have been a fair assessment. The problem is we've taken 3 steps back and no steps forward. So on
offense we took a step forward, but
yes,
it's mitigated.
And that was a great hire, bringing in Darrell Bevel. He still has some extremely head-scratching play calls offensively. But Matthew Stafford, before his injury, was having one of the most productive seasons of his career. Jeff Driscoll has been performing more than well enough to get the wins these past 2 games. It is not the offense's fault. The fact of the matter is that the defense sucks. Our defense is garbage. It is one of the worst in the NFL. And I remember when we talked about the Oakland game, we were concerned about the defense. And what do you know? The defense cost us that game. The offense played well enough. Dallas, defense cost us that game. Every single game this year has been lost by the defense. I've placed no blame on the offense this year because they don't deserve it, frankly. I'm getting worked up here because I care and because I do think the Lions have more talent than what they've been proving to me on the field. But maybe they don't, and maybe that's something I just have to accept. We're 3-6-1 right now. I would hope that we sideline Matt Stafford for the rest of the year in order to save him. Maybe we get better next year. That's the hope. But there's no point in jeopardizing, his health, his career for the sake of winning 2 or 3 more games to, worsen our draft position. But I think I've said enough for now. I'll see. What are your thoughts, Bobby?
Really, I'm just quite disgusted with what I've seen. Nothing like getting. I can't even know how to put this into words. But a year ago, we're sitting here, we're saying, Derek and I are talking about this, and we're like, he's like, Bobby, if it's a coaching issue next year, or if it's a player personnel issue next year, as in this season, will be the tell if it's a personnel issue, because we've changed coaching, we've changed the offensive scheme, we've changed everything. Except I guess we didn't change Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia. Right. We changed our offensive coordinator, and that's where we were seeing a lot of struggles. We were seeing under Jim Bob Cooter, we weren't able to move the ball at all. Play calling was highly questionable. Us sitting, in our dorm room could call a better game than that.
We were calling the plays.
And we were calling the plays. I mean, it was
very predictable offense. I could even tell that.
Yeah.
First down, up the gut. Second down, up the gut. Third down, pass. Now, I will say Darrell Bevel has brought a new element to this offense, as in we're, mixing it up. We're riding with the passes when they are working. We are adjusting, which is something that we weren't doing under, Jim Bob Cooter. However, our defensive personnel, I don't know what is going on. I want to say, I am going to say Bob Quinn needs to be fired immediately.
And I can't argue that.
Bob Quinn needs to be fired. Like you said, he's had 4 years, and we not even so much as come close to. We lost, as Dennis was pointing out before this podcast, 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, we were almost in a playoff position with Jim Caldwell. We lost the Bengals.
Yep.
And we were eliminated from playoff contention. And now look at what the Bengals are.
Yeah.
And we were not good then either.
And they weren't that. Yeah, they weren't good then either.
It was not good.
And so, we don't have, and I will continue to stick by the fact that we need to bring in players that have been there in big moments. They know how to handle things. They know how to, step up and lead guys. Because, we think about this, and Derek, I think, can speak to this as well. If you look back at the history of the Lions in our lifetime, what big games have 90% of these players been in? Zero. They've not been playing very few of them. We've been to a couple playoff games. We've lost those. Those have been wild cards.
Yep.
Wild cards have never
have
actually
not had a
division.
home playoff game.
No home playoff games. We've been with low expectations all our lives. And so, normally teams thrive under that low expectations. They're not expected to do anything.
Right, play with the chip on their shoulder.
They play with a chip on their shoulder. And, that still is not able to get it done. We need players that have been there and, know how to lead that team. But we also need somebody that's going to bring in players like that and also, manage our coaching staff better, as in our general manager, Bob Quinn, as he needs to go. I'm very skeptical. I don't know, like you said, on the defense, I think it's a personnel issue, just because on the field, when the players actually go at it, we're not seeing anything.
Right.
But, it's something to be said for Matt Patricia not, putting people in position to be successful.
I agree.
But I'm just not sure, because he was such a defensive mastermind, as we heard, for years. And we saw some victories on the Patriots. Matt Patricia was just getting showered in credit.
Yeah, he was.
In how he was coaching that defense with the Patriots that were Super Bowl champions. And now he comes here and we look like Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of we always try to copy what everybody else is doing instead of implementing our own original. Build it up. We're not like any other franchise.
Right. Because we're awful.
Because we're awful. We need to build this up from the ground up. And I really thought we had that with, the Matt Stafford era, which unfortunately now seems to be coming closer to the end.
Yeah.
And, I really was hoping we could get a playoff win with him at the helm, because he's good enough to get a playoff win.
Easily.
And even some of the defensive players that we have are good enough to be on starting defenses. But we just can't seem to put the pieces together at the same time. It's always one thing goes right here, one thing goes wrong there. Next season, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And so that lack of consistency tells me that the players, aren't playing up to potential on a given week. Mm-hmm. That tells me that the front office and the coaching staff isn't motivating and isn't, putting in game plans on a consistent basis that are going to be successful. And I really think that we need to, consider, trading some of our better players if we're not serious about making a push right now.
Yeah.
The Bob Quinn or whoever's above him, Martha Firestone Ford even, and her elder age, needs to decide that if she's going to win a title or win a playoff game before she even hits the grave, they're going to have to bring in somebody with name brand quality. And that's just something that we have not seen on the Detroit Lions in our life. Somebody that we brought in that was name brand.
Yeah, and I think, Bob Quinn, there's a couple points I want to bring up. I'll start with Bob Quinn. Has swung and missed on a lot of draft picks. Tez Tabor is the first one that comes to mind. Second round pick, cornerback. Everyone said, this guy is too slow, don't draft him. Bob Quinn said, no, he's tall enough, he's lengthy enough, he'll be fine. Dude got caught. He couldn't hack it. There's plenty of guys that we have drafted that just aren't making a huge impact like they've been expected to. Jared Davis is a big one. There's been a lot of questionable decisions like Jelani Tavai. Really the only real good draft picks you can point to at this point are, Kenny Golladay. Yep. That was a home run in the third round. I'll give him credit for that one. I think Tracy Walker has been playing really well. That was a pretty solid pick. Frank Ragnow, has he been this, run blocking beast everyone said he was in college? I don't know. I don't think
he's been the ire of consistency by any means, but we have seen flashes.
Yes, we have. TJ Hawkinson.
Too soon to tell on him.
The production hasn't been there, and Bobby, one of his favorite things is the P word, production. He preaches production, and we just haven't seen it. I don't know if that's a result of, our offensive scheme just not being tailored to him. But if it isn't, then why did we draft him? And two, why do we still have 3 tight ends on the roster?
That was my thing after last year's draft. And I know you were dragging this segment out, but it really does matter to us.
It does.
We really do care. And
it's just questionable.
It's questionable because you look at the Detroit Lions and what Bob Quinn selected T.J. Hawkinson with the 8th pick in the draft, I believe, a top 10 selection. And that, T.J. Hawkinson was a sought-after commodity.
Outstanding tight end.
An outstanding tight end. Everybody. It's not like Bob Quinn was going out on a huge limb and taking T.J. Hawkinson. He was somebody that was a bona fide first-round pick. Mm-hmm. But the thing was that I told Derek then, and I still believe now, when you selected tight end, I mean, this is after signing Jesse James, a veteran tight end, somebody who's played a lot, can definitely run a system. You're telling us that you have sounded shirt up every other position, essentially, because the tight end is one of the, I'd say one of the least important positions on the team. Obviously, you want to have a good tight end. But, the lines on both sides of the ball, the secondary, other skill positions even, the linebacking core are all more important, I would say, than tight end.
Yeah.
And he was telling us that he had shored up those positions. And then even for example, could have taken a Devin Bush.
Right. Yeah.
There
are plenty of options.
Instead of
who's playing fantastic.
There was plenty of options. Even we don't know even what Ed Oliver would have done in the Detroit system. I mean, he's not been playing out of his mind to this point, but
you never know what could have
happened.
Yep.
And he wasn't even focused on the defense almost in the slightest before he went out and drafted somebody that they didn't even have any tape on the guy's show during the second round of the draft. And they didn't even. I remember when that draft pick occurred when we drafted Tavai in the second round. They didn't even talk about it at all.
Because they didn't have anything to talk about.
They had no idea what to talk about.
They didn't no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And it's something to be said for we have to be drafting players that have played in big moments in college. What has the University of Hawaii been doing?
Nothing.
I mean, obviously Tavai showed stuff in college that got him drafted, and props to him. But what has Hawaii been competing for?
Nothing.
It's the same thing. We draft players that haven't been competing for anything to play for a team that's also not competing for anything, and that mindset right there tanks your team.
Yeah, that's a really solid point, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's. It's not something really I've thought about until you just brought it up. Now, that's a really good point. The guys you draft and the culture they come from, probably plays more of a role than the casual fan might assume. So that's a great point. Just couple more quick things, and then we'll get into the predictions real quick.
And Dennis, feel free to chime in.
Yeah,
as well.
go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just completely agree with what Bobby was just talking about over there. You got to have. And I know this is something that Bobby preaches a lot about culture and
the winners and
intangibles. But if you've got a guy purely based on talent, but from a school that doesn't compete or doesn't actually play anybody, and that's not their culture, then his value is going to be significantly reduced. When a lot of people don't see that, you got a guy who's competing every day, say an Alabama, Auburn, Ohio State, sure that they're going to be talented as well, and they're going to have lots of coaching, but they're also going to be in a very competitive, driven culture.
Yes.
And that's the background that they're going to come from, and they're going to bring that with them when they come to your team. And so that's hugely valuable, and that's something that I think a lot of NFL executives just kind of overlook.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think, the winners, actually, that's not what I want to say. What I want to say is, even looking at Antonio Brown, small school, but CMU was competing for the MAC when he was there.
Yep.
So it's not like he was coming from a trashy CMU team. I'm pretty sure they won a MAC championship when Antonio Brown and Dan Lefevre were at CMU. So it's not like
they were knocking off the MSUs.
They did.
You don't have to come from a big program. You have to come from a competitive program.
Exactly.
And I don't know enough about Hawaii to even say anything about Giovanni Tavai in this particular.
Let's just say they're not winning the Mountain West every year.
Exactly, and that's the kind of thing that really nags at me because we never see. I mean, even thinking back to Eric Ebron, the man was a first-round pick, a tight end, and he was drafted from Duke.
North Carolina.
Sorry, North Carolina. I apologize. North Carolina.
You're thinking of Laken Tomlinson, the guard we took in the first round from Duke.
Yes.
Either way, the same principle applies. Go ahead.
Because what are those teams competing for? They're immensely talented players. As we see, Eric Ebron moves on to a different scheme, makes the Pro Bowl.
Yep.
Good for him, but I feel really bad that the Lions apparently weren't utilizing him correctly.
Yeah, still hasn't done much this year, though. I'm going to write that one off as an anomaly, but continue.
But it's the same thing. Why aren't we drafting players that are coming from the... I mean, we're definitely in the draft position to be drafting these people. We're in the top 10 every year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why can't we draft people that are coming from the Alabamas, the LSUs, the Floridas, the people that are having to go out and compete? They had to compete at the top level to get into those schools.
That's right.
They had to compete at the top level to maintain those jobs.
Yep.
They had to compete at the top level to beat the teams that they were playing at week to week and rise their draft stock because it wasn't like they were showing out against horrible competition.
Right.
And then, what's to say that pattern's automatically going to stop now that they reach the Detroit Lions?
Highly unlikely.
That's
a great point. I love that point. These are kids that are getting recruited by some of the best schools in the land. Mm-hmm. You have to compete at such a high level to be able to get there, and then to keep your job, win your job.
Because those schools are also recruiting more top-end talent. So
from across the country.
You're always competing with top-end talent, even within your own program.
Exactly. You've got to be beating guys that were recruited by the same school that you were.
Exactly.
Continuously.
Uh-huh.
And then you have to take that talent level, that drive, if you will, and then go use that to beat other teams and other programs for your school. And you have to do so at a level that allows you to keep your job throughout the entire season. And not only that, you can't be mediocre, you have to be exceptional. Because otherwise you're not going to be talked about in the first round of the NFL draft.
And the same concept applies for the Cincinnati Bengals as well.
It does.
I mean, if you look at...
I think you can apply it anywhere.
It's almost, anywhere. But just two great examples sitting in for fans in this podcast.
Yep.
The Bengals and the Lions have the same ploy. They draft people, or they have a losing culture.
Yeah,
and
that's what
obviously that it starts with the the ownership and who you have at the GM.
It's a top-down.
It's a top-down thing, but it's honestly not. It doesn't help when your bottom is already starting bottomed out, and you have to bring them up.
And when your top isn't really doing anything either.
Exactly. So when you're standing pat, you can't stand pat on players that haven't had to compete against the best.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those players competing in those top programs have had the goal of making it to the NFL, have had the goal of being the best. Obviously, most football players have the goal of making it to the NFL. But if you're at Alabama, you're at LSU, you're at Florida, you're at Notre Dame.
Your chances are realistic.
You're at Ohio State. Your chances are high, and you're going to be getting a lot of coverage and potentially a lot of scouts and a lot of talent evaluators that are going to want to check out if you're the real deal. Because obviously, if Ohio State thought you were the real deal, they're automatically ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy might actually be something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, another point, you said, we have to bring in guys with winners and intangibles when you were talking about free agency. That was one thing that we failed to do.
For sure.
And, Bob Quinn in free agency has tried to bring in those big names, and he swung and missed. Let's just, look at TJ Lang. He played well, but he was injury prone, and he couldn't stay healthy. Rick Wagner was the best offensive tackle in that free agency class. He also can't stay healthy, and he really hasn't been anything special playing how he did in Baltimore. Trey Flowers, he was a big-name guy from New England. Bill Belichick let him go. Was it rightfully so? Maybe. He was never really, an esteemed pass rusher, but why are we taking a guy that isn't an esteemed pass rusher?
Because that's what we don't have.
Justin Coleman, cornerback. He was a big name from Seattle, also played in New England. He was really good early on in the year, but he's fallen off since. And one of the really big things that stood out to me was Darius Slay's play this past weekend. He did not have a good game. And I don't know if that's, an anomaly or if that's, symbolic of this season giving up. Michael Gallup made him look silly for most of the game. And, he had a couple chances to make really big plays and didn't do so. Had an interception go right through his hands on a long third down that ended up turning into a scoring drive for Dallas. And the entire defense as a whole just looks like they don't want to be out there anymore. And if that's the case, then something needs to change. Does anyone have anything else to say about that? But, the one really big thing I think it all goes back to, as Bobby pointed out, is indeed that, you got to come from a winner's culture if you want to bring in and start a winner's culture if your team's like the Lions and Bengals. Oh, there was one more thing quick. We were talking about, let's take it two polar opposite players here. Mitchell Trubisky and Deshaun Watson. Everyone was, skeptical of Deshaun Watson as a quarterback for some reason. He won the national championship and beat Alabama. He went to Houston, later in the first round and was overlooked by a lot of teams. And for what? Dude had winners intangibles, was a proven winner, came from a winning culture, and look what he's done for Houston. Sure, they're not having the greatest season this year.
But it's not because
big
of
win
Deshaun
last
Watson.
night.
That's right, and it's not always his fault. They had a big win last night.
That's right.
And they've always been competitive
They've been
since
in the
he's
playoffs.
been there. They have been in the playoffs. The Texans have been competitive since he got there. Then you look at Mitch Trubisky. When we talk about Eric Ebron, that's what brought it up for me. Also from North Carolina. The Bears traded up to get this man, and he stinks. He is awful. And what else did you expect? Taking a guy from a team that couldn't even, win the ACC. Granted, Clemson's in there, but they weren't even competitive. So, I think a lot of, I hope the Lions, I hope Martha Ford really takes a good, hard look, at the state of the Lions this point and says, where do we go from here? And if it's firing Bob Quinn, I wouldn't be opposed. If it's firing Matt Patricia, I wouldn't be opposed.
But if we're going to tank, these are not the people we need to lead this.
Yes, and it's very concerning, the trend that we've seen out of the Lions, these past couple years with Matt Patricia, and the fact that both our GM and head coach have losing records. One last thing about the Lions, predictions for this week. Dennis, what do you got against the Washington Redskins?
I think that they're able to actually, beat the Redskins.
I would sure hope so.
At this point, maybe it's not even the best thing, just reducing some draft value unless you're going to win out. There's really not a shot here. But in terms of this week, I think I'll go with 24-10 Lions. I'll give them 14 over the Redskins. Washington's terrible.
Yeah, they are. Tickets are going for as low as $5 in Washington.
Atrocious.
So if you're listening to us in D.C. or something crazy like that, probably not, but you might as well throw the possibility out there. Go ahead and watch the Lions-Redskins game for $5. Might be worth your money, might not be. Bobby, what you got?
I've got the Lions in a barn burner, 27-24, coming out with a win. I just don't know if I think the defense, the Lions in the past have been extremely prone to making quarterbacks that are average or look average, or offenses that look average.
Look like all pros.
Look like all pros. And so I'm thinking that our offense will be enough to get it done, but our defense will still be a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to go with 27-13, another 14-point victory. But don't be surprised if we lose or if this game is even closer than that, because it's not going to surprise me. But definitely for the Lions looking forward, if you're Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn, you better see improvement because your hot seat is warming up. Big games in the NFL this week as we wind down towards the end of our show here today. We got Dem Boys versus America's real team this week, the New England Patriots versus the Dallas Cowboys. And if you didn't get the joke, New England is America's team. The Cowboys are a fraud. I haven't won it. They've done about as much as the Lions have in the past 20 years with better teams and better players and more money. Regardless, this is a big game for both teams. The Cowboys, got a gift from the Patriots with New England beating Philadelphia last week and Dallas taking care of Detroit. But the NFC East is awful. The Cowboys are probably going to win that division just because of the state of that division. But, the Cowboys are losing Leighton Vander Esch for this one, and that is a huge blow to that defense. The Cowboys, Jeff Driscoll had a heck of a performance against the Cowboys, and, he might have been able to expose some flaws in that defense that New England might be able to exploit. Dennis, who do you got this week? Cowboys Pats in Foxborough, 4:30 Eastern on Fox.
I've got the Pats. The Cowboys are a joke. Come on. This is ridiculous. I don't even know why we're talking about this. I don't know why this is America's Game of the Week. It's just because it's America's real team versus America's fake team, in my opinion.
That's right.
I just can't stand the Cowboys. I'm a little bit biased. I don't think that they're worth their salt in any sense of the matter, and so I'm going to go with the Pats. I'm going to take 30-16.
Oh, wow.
30-16 Patriots. Okay. I think Tom Brady comes out there and just absolutely lights up the Dallas defense. And,
love to see it.
Proves just how fraudulent they are. I agree, Dallas will still probably win the East, but that's only because the East is awful.
Yeah. Bobby, what's your take?
I'm looking at the spread right now. This game, it's Pats -6.5. I think Dallas.
That's a touchdown spread right there.
I think Dallas covers. I got 23-20 Pats.
Okay.
I agree with Dennis. The Patriots, I think, defensively are going to be too much for Dallas's offense. Dallas isn't facing Detroit's defense this week. This is a much better defense. And, let's just take another shot at Matt Patricia here. It looks like New England's defense has gotten even better since he left, but I digress. I also have the Patriots coming out on this one. I'm going to give them 31-20 over Dallas. And once again, that is the 4:30 game on Fox. America's Game of the Week with America's team, the New England Patriots. Moving on, it's the Battle of the Birds, the Seahawks versus the aforementioned Eagles. Russell Wilson still trying to continue his MVP campaign. Carson Wentz and the Eagles coming off of a pretty, disappointing, frustrating loss to the Patriots where they had the lead and then didn't score in the second half to lose that one. The Seahawks offense, really good this year, and Philadelphia's offense, not really good this year. I think Seattle's going to be too much for Philadelphia to handle in this one. We're just looking at ESPN right now. FPI's got Philadelphia with the 56.4% chance to win.
That's terrible.
Which is very surprising to me. I really don't understand how Philadelphia, is favored in this one. It's pretty atrocious if you ask me. -1 on the point spread, according to ESPN's Pick Center. I see
Must
this.
be a home game for the Eagles.
It is a home game for the Eagles.
They got bet down. Wow, the -3 automatic home spread got bet down to -1. That's how much Vegas has faith in the old Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, that's really surprising to me. I don't even think this one's going to be close. I got Seattle 34-13 in this one.
Yeah, I agree on most of those points as well. Seattle is going to be able to come into Philadelphia and take care of business, as I would say.
For
I think
sure.
Philadelphia is quite fraudulent. I'm going to go, I think Russell Wilson has another big day as well. I'm going to go with 27-13. Seattle, that is.
Bobby, what are you thinking?
Gosh, I don't know. There's a part of me that just wants to say that the Eagles are going to come out and win this game.
Just for the sake of counter argument, or
Not
because you
devil's
actually think
advocate.
it?
Not just for the sake of counter argument, but I think that especially I think if Philadelphia wins this game, they have a great shot of winning the NFC East.
So you think because this is sort of a
just because-
line in the sand type of game that they've come out and
Just
laid
because
all
they have
out?
a weaker ending of their schedule that they play, and they're right there with Dallas. I think a game back of Dallas, and they still have another game against Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
But the spread being -1 spread. I think this is going to be high scoring.
Okay.
I think that Carson Wentz is going to have a big game today, just because he's going to want to, or a big game. If his receivers can catch the ball, they'll have a big game.
Which has been a struggle
been a-
all
that's
year
been a
long.
big
Which has been a huge struggle. God, if I had to say the final score on this one, I've got Seattle 33, Philadelphia 30.
Okay. So all three of us in favor of Seattle,
All right.
three of us in favor of New England. This next game, our final game, before we get into
Oh my gosh, this could be something.
before we get into our favorite segment, before we close the show, I'll just read you guys Bobby's his line text right here. The fraudulent 49ers versus the even more fraudulent Packers. I don't know if I would go as far as calling either of those teams fraudulent, as much as I despise the Green Bay Packers. I don't know if I'd quite call them fraudulent, but I'm also not opposed to calling them fraudulent. But the 49ers, offensively, up to this point, they've kind of just been doing what they have to do to get the win. Their defense has really been the thing that's been pulling them along. Bosa on the defensive line, and all those other guys that really just contribute and make that defense great. Green Bay offensively, it's going to be fun. Green Bay's got a pretty good offense. Alex Jones, is that his name? I think the running back.
Aaron Jones.
Aaron Jones, yes.
Aaron
Aaron
Jones.
Jones. You can see how much I care about the Packers. Aaron Jones has been really good for them this year. The bad man, Aaron Rodgers, has been pretty solid for him. Devontae Adams, when healthy, has been good, but as
Questionable this week.
my fantasy team would know, he has not been. George Kittle,
Questionable this week.
that is huge for San Francisco.
Yeah, it might be coming back.
Bobby said earlier that the tight end is, not quite as important as a lot of other positions.
He's a big difference maker. He's almost like a wideout for them.
Yeah, that's a big example.
I think when you look at successful teams, most successful teams have very good tight ends.
They do.
The Chiefs have Travis Kelce. The 49ers have George Kittle. The Raiders even have Darren Waller. You're an under-the-radar type of guy that's really been proving himself this year. The Patriots had Gronk for a number of years. So, when the Eagles have Zach Ertz, Cowboys had Jason Witten, a lot of really good teams.
But the Cowboys haven't been successful. I just want to point that out.
No, they have not. But, they've had more wins than the Lions have than by a large number.
That is true.
But it hasn't really equated to playoff, success, obviously. But, just throwing that out there that the tight end is a big position, and for the 49ers, it's huge for them. Like George Kittle is, a really dynamic playmaker for them. And I think, this game might go down to, is George Kittle going to play? If he does, we're looking at the spread again on ESPN. 49ers favored -3.
Home field advantage.
Home field advantage. Green Bay and California have not been good this year, a la their loss against the Chargers. I have the 49ers winning this one, and I think it's going to be low scoring because, the Packers, don't sleep on the Packers defense either. They've really upgraded that with the quote-unquote Smith brothers, as they like to call themselves, not related, but both with the last name of Smith, both very good. I foresee this being a pretty defensive battle. I've got the 49ers coming out on top 24-20. Dennis, what do you think?
This is going to be a competitive game. I've just really kind of enjoyed watching San Francisco in these primetime games the last couple weeks. That game against Seattle 2 weeks ago was quite arguably the best game of the year.
It was awesome.
I don't think many people would dissent. If you have a better game that's been played this year, I'd love to hear it. But that was a fantastic game. I think this will be another example of that. Jimmy G, Aaron Rodgers going at it. George Kittle, as Derek was just talking about, will be a huge factor. But at the end of the day, in San Francisco, I think the 49ers are going to come out on top as well. It'll be close. I'm going to give them a 30-27 offensive game, 30-27.
Okay.
I've got the Packers coming out ahead on this one.
Okay, first disagreement we've got.
Jimmy G is way too prone to turning the ball over.
Okay.
Thrown 10 picks already this season. I think that, especially when you're playing the bad man.
Can't give away opportunities.
And we all know that Aaron Rodgers isn't one to give away many opportunities.
No, only 2 interceptions on the year.
I think that turnovers will be a huge part of this game because I also don't think it'll be very high scoring either. I'm looking for this to be probably a 2017 finish for the Packers. If George Kittle plays, that'll be huge for the offensive hopes of the 49ers, but also don't sleep on Jimmy G coughing it up in the clutch.
Okay. Can't really, argue with any of that logic there. So just to recap, we got 3-0 Patriots, 3-0 Seahawks, and 2-1 49ers with Bobby taking the Packers. And now for our favorite segment of the show, the Right Bench Ballers. For those of you that are new here, the Right Bench Ballers is a segment where we take overlooked, under the radar type of guys. Your classic bench player that really takes advantage of an opportunity that he's been given, comes out, has a breakout performance, and, really, helps his team out. Who wants to start it off this week?
Dennis, you've been deprived at some parts of the show, I feel like. Why don't you give it a go?
All right, Dennis, you have the floor.
All right, I'll give it a go. I'm going to go with none other than Jonathan Williams, running back for the Indianapolis Colts. Played his second start for the Colts at running back this week in a defeat to the Houston Texans just last night. But went for 121 all-purpose yards and a touchdown on the ground. This is a man who has accumulated 221 yards on the season. And he's only played in 4 games. And one of those games, he didn't even have a registered yard. And so, coming out of nowhere, I really could have picked him last week as well. Big performance against the Jaguars, I believe it was.
Filling in for Marlon Mack.
Marlon Mack. Yeah, he went for 116 on the ground just a week ago. And then this week, 121, 17 of those through the air. And so, I think that this has been an incredible asset to the Colts so far. And even though they were unable to find victory on Thursday Night Football against Deshaun Watson and the Texans, I think that he'll prove big for them down the stretch, and I've just been really impressed by the performance that he's put together in the absence of Marlon Mack.
Well, moving on to my bright bench baller, I've got none other than the Detroit Lions' finest, Jeff Driscoll.
Jeff, we trust.
Backup quarterback for the Detroit Lions, even though they have had 2 losses in starts that he's played in. This past week they played Dallas, as we've talked about. He threw for 209 yards with a 60% completion percentage, QBR of 66. Not too shabby.
But he did turn the ball over.
Not too shabby if you ask me. 66 on a scale of 0 to 150 being average. He played above average game.
That he did.
And 2 tubs, 0 interceptions. Did not cough the ball up, which is huge for a backup. He looked like the second coming of Michael Vick at times, just gashing the Cowboys' defense with runs. And the man's got some speed, which is something that we haven't really seen from Matt Stafford. So it's really refreshing to see a quarterback that can get loose, as I like to say. But no, he played well enough to win that game. And it's unfortunate he only lost by 8 points to the Cowboys, who are one of the highest teams in the league. That's in terms of difficulty to play against. However, I would love to see him come out against Washington this week and have another big performance. But kudos to him. Cut by the Bengals.
Yeah, interestingly
now
enough.
Starting for the Lions and looking fairly decent. Dare I say, better than Ryan Finley?
Yeah, he was on the Bengals roster before this season started. I saw him in a training camp afternoon. I went down to Paul Brown Stadium, and he was in Bengals uniform. Now he's playing for the Lions.
But did the Bengals make this mistake? I think so.
Perhaps we did.
Jeff Driscoll, my great bench baller.
And finally, last but not least, second season out of none other than Rutgers University, Gus Edwards, Baltimore Ravens running back. Let's just take a look, give you a little brief history of Gus Edwards' season. He has not started a game this season. He had not gotten over 60 yards rushing in a game this season, and until a couple weeks ago against New England, did not have a single rushing touchdown. This past week against Houston before the Thursday night game, obviously, the man absolutely exploded. 8 carries, 112 yards, good for 14 yards per carry and 1 touchdown.
That's incredible.
With a long of 63 yards.
Loose.
He now has 2 TDs, averages 5.5 yards a carry and 390 yards on the season. So as you can see, he was the epitome of the right bench baller for this week, with Mark Ingram taking the majority of the snaps there. Gus Edwards really made his mark last week for Baltimore in a blowout win over the Houston Texans with that vaunted offense that's in Baltimore. But once again, Gus Edwards, big congratulations to you, my friend, as well as to Jeff Driscoll, as well as Jamal Williams. Jonathan Williams, sorry.
You're all good.
Big congratulations to all 3 of those guys as our right bench ballers of the week. I think that about wraps it up for us here. Is there anything you guys would like to say before we close?
Just for next week's podcast note, please look for the episode on Wednesday. It's Thanksgiving break for us here at CMU, so we're going to be looking to record the next week's podcast on Wednesday before we leave for break, so we can still get an episode out next week for you guys. Please remember, as Derek said in the beginning, to follow us on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Drop a comment, drop that 5-star rating. Please show support in any way that you can, if you feel so inclined.
Yep, feel free to leave a comment on YouTube if you have any, topics that you'd like us to cover as well.
Because we don't want to, we want to talk about what our viewers want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys want to hear, Detroit Lions and Bengals mediocrity every week,
we'd be more
than happy to rant about it to you guys. But if you guys want to hear about some other big games that are going on, then we'd love to bring that to you guys from our perspective.
Yep.
But anyway, please, thank you for the support.
Yep.
1 month in, as Dennis said, and it's really been a hell of a time.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed it.
We really enjoyed it. So, thank you guys.
Dennis, anything? Or no?
Dito.
Alrighty. Well, if we shall partake in the closing ceremonies.
Woo!
On a 1,
2,
3.
Peace.